right. Hello again, everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties. One of our panelists is still trying to log in. My name is Kevin Navratil. If you don't know me, I'm a political science professor at Moraine Valley, and I am also the Democracy Commitment Coordinator. And one of the things that I do in my position as the Democracy Commitment Coordinator is try to plan events and try to promote civic learning and civic literacy on campus. And I'm very happy that two of my colleagues who we've worked together so many times in the past, Dr. Deron Schreck and Professor Merri Fefles-Dunkle, we have worked together on, I don't know, 6 different election cycles, presidential and congressional elections, and primaries, and the general election. And so it's just a pleasure to work with them. And I'm really glad that they're willing to share their insights onto the 2020 election. And I want to thank all of you for the attendees. I can see that we already have about 60 people who are logged in. So thank you. Thank you for coming. It's an exciting time with this 2020 election. And what I wanted to do before I turn it over to my colleagues is just let you know that there is under Canvas a chat function for you to share any comments or questions that you have. The idea was that each one of us would take 10 or 15 minutes or so to provide a brief overview of our thoughts on the 2020 election, and then open it up for questions and comments. So with that in mind, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Deron Schreck, and see if he is ready to start.
So I thank you for everybody for attending this WebEx panel discussion. We have an interesting and exciting election coming up next week. And start off by saying, hopefully you are registered to vote. Hopefully you've voted already or are planning on voting next week. And if judging by the lines that I've already seen in local polling areas early on, you want to make sure that you give yourself some time because the lines are quite long. And once we have all of the voting facilities opening, we know that there are going to be long lines there too. So give yourself some time next Tuesday. Like I said, thank you for coming. And where I'm going to start with this election discussion is basically talking about the U.S. Senate races, our House races, and some Illinois contests as well. Right now, we have in the United States Senate, we have 53 Republicans and 43 Democrats seated. 2 of those, I should clarify that 2 of those who call themselves Democrats are independents, but they work with those Democratic leaders of the Senate. This election, we have 35 seats that are contested. We would say that 11 of those seats are safe Democratic seats, which means that there's pretty much no chance that a Republican can win those. And then there are 10 safe seats for Republicans where we would say the same thing, that Democrats really can't win those either. The current tea leaves out there say that there will be a Democratic majority. In order for that to happen, the Democrats would have to win at least 4 seats with a Joe Biden victory and at least 5 seats with a Trump victory. And I'll explain the difference between the two in a second. Where there are competitive seats, right now there are what we would say 7, let me count that again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 toss-up seats on the Republican side. All of those seats are Republican, I should say. Iowa, Maine, Montana, North Carolina, South Carolina, and there are 2 contested seats in Georgia this year. Right now, we would say that on the Republican side, there is a potential for one pickup in Alabama that is currently held by a Democrat by the name of Doug Jones. He got that seat basically because he had a fringe Republican opponent when he was running for the Senate. This is likely to turn to the Republican side this time around. Tommy Tuberville, who was a former college football coach, is very popular in the state and looks to be the victor this time around. On the Democratic side, it seems like there would be two pickups right now. In Colorado, Cory Gardner, the Republican, is running against former Governor John Hickenlooper, and it looks like Hickenlooper has the lead in that race. Martha McSally in Arizona, a Republican who was appointed to that position, looks like she is on the ropes and losing in the polls to Mark Kelly, a popular Democrat in the state and husband of former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who you might remember was shot at a campaign stop a few years back. We also have what we would say there are 3 Republican seats that might go Democratic in Alaska, Kansas, and Texas. And there's 1 Democratic seat in Michigan that might go Republican, but those are what I would say are on the fringe. The Republicans this time around knew they had a lot of seats to defend, and they've had to defend them with a lot of money infused in those states. But they've also run up against a huge Democratic fundraising machine in states like South Carolina and North Carolina and Iowa, especially Maine, with Susan Collins, the Republican, who looks to have a competitive race against Sarah Gideon. Those states look like they're trending Democratic, but that's what the polls say. And what happens on election day might be totally different. So the Democrats have the upper hand in getting that majority. It just depends on how many people show up and vote in those down ballot races. Something less exciting is what's going on in the U.S. House. The Democrats have a majority going in. Not much will change here. There's probably going to be a greater Democratic majority coming out of Election Day. Right now, the current prediction is that Democrats hold 228 seats, 181 seats on the Republican side, and 26 toss-ups. Of those toss-ups, most of them are Republican, and there's the 1 Libertarian seat that was Republican at one point. So Republicans have a lot to defend, and if these numbers all go this way, Democrats could have at least maybe 240 seats in the U.S. House. There's pretty much no chance that the Republicans are going to have a Republican majority in the House, probably for quite some time. And then there's Illinois. We have Dick Durbin, who's been a senator for 4 terms. He is the second highest ranking Democrat in the Senate. He has raised $6.7 million. He's running against an ex-Lake County sheriff, Mark Curran, who's only raised about $314,000. The Republicans have a pretty weak bench in this state in terms of who's coming up in the ranks to compete in races like this. And I also threw Willie Wilson up there. I like Willie Wilson personally, but he's a fun guy. He also created his own political party called the WWP, the Willie Wilson Party. The only reason why I threw him up there as an independent is because he's actually spending $3 million of his own money to run. In the United States House, there are 18 seats that we have in this state. Only one is competitive. That's downstate Illinois 13 with Rodney Davis, a Republican who has a challenge from his left. The Illinois General Assembly, all 118 House seats are being contested, I guess you could say, or at least on the ballot. Only 9 of them are open seats, and 20 out of the 59 Senate seats are up for grabs, and 6 of them are open. And that brings us to, if you picked up your mail or watched television in the last 10 minutes, let's say, you probably have heard about our constitutional amendment. Our constitutional amendment is about our graduated income tax. Right now, everybody is paying a flat 4.95% income tax. With this graduated income tax proposal, the new tax brackets would essentially not change anybody's tax rate if you're making between $100,000 and $249,000 a year. You would stay at 4.95. People who are making less than $100,000, you would be paying a rate of either 0 or 4.90. And then on top of that, above $250,000, we get our graduated income tax. $250,000 to about $500,000 is 7.75. $500,000 to $1 million is 7.85. And above $1 million, you'd be paying 7.95 in your income tax. The difference between what we do now with our income tax and let's say somebody who's making $1 million, right now you pay a rate. You don't necessarily pay 4.95 on your income. You pay it off a portion of your income. For anybody making over $1 million, you will be paying 7.95% on your income directly. So there's the big difference in the shift between a flat and what we might call a fair tax. The proponents and opponents, $56 million has been spent by Governor Pritzker alone in terms of pushing for a fair tax. He would say, and proponents would say, that we need to fill the budget gap. Over $60 million has been spent in total in favor of the fair tax in marketing. Other states have a sliding scale or progressive or graduated income tax system. So Illinois is saying, why not us? Arguments against it, conservative groups have spent about $50 million. They believe this will drive businesses out of Illinois. They believe that we already have a spending problem in Illinois, not a taxing problem. And then they also would argue that once the wealthy well runs dry, the taxes will increase on the middle class. So those are the arguments favor and against it on both sides. In order to pass it, you need 60% on the question to support it, or 50% plus one on the number of people who voted in the election. Either way, it looks like it's favoring towards the passage at this point based on recent polls, and we don't poll very much in the state on constitutional questions, but in a recent Illinois Springfield poll, which was taken in late September, about 67% favored the passage of the amendment. Okay, so that's it for me at this point, and I'll throw it back to Kevin, and later on I'll take some questions about some of these slides.
Hey, thanks so much, Deron. And I look forward to talking more about some of the points you raised about the Senate races and the constitutional amendment to change the tax structure. I think that's something that we should dive into a little deeper. At this point, Merri, are you ready to? All right, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague. She wears a lot of hats. She is a political science professor, a history professor, and a sociology professor. So, Merri Fefles-Dunkle, go ahead.
Thanks, Kevin. And am I able to share my? Okay, I see this on here. Are you able to see that, folks? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
I can see it.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much, Kevin. It's nice to be Kevin and Deron and I joke that we have our getting the band back together. It's a little nervous for me to be up here prognosticating because after the last election, 2016, we were also wrong about what happened. But it's always it's so fun to be with colleagues, and I have to say I miss being in the library with you guys all together. But at least this is a good second choice. I also want to point out I am wearing not a tied shirt, in case any of you saw this, but I'm wearing a vote shirt. So I'm encouraging every single one of you to get out there and vote, please. So it's very important. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the judiciary, because this is a subject that whenever I teach American government is my favorite. And obviously this is one where we have been doing a lot of talking about recently. I wanted to focus on the judiciary because obviously just last night, many of you may have heard that Justice Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed as the latest justice. That would be Donald Trump's third Supreme Court justice pick. And so I want to talk about a couple different things. The idea that why has the Supreme Court in recent years become so contentious? The fact that the Supreme Court really has not been something that's on the radar of most Americans. You know, if you did polling before, that was the branch of government that most Americans could identify the least. And if you asked them to identify at least one justice, most of them could not. Before they could identify John Roberts, that was usually the one. He's the guy that's right here in the middle. the Chief Justice. But lately, I think that that number has added with in recent cases with people like Brett Kavanaugh and probably now with Amy Coney Barrett. And I'll talk hopefully a little bit about stare decisis if we have some time talking about some of the like her recent confirmation hearing. Okay, I just wanted to point out a couple things here because you're hearing a lot in the news about with the upcoming election, what happens if one candidate wins versus the other. And we'll talk more about this too I'm sure with my colleagues. But so who decides but how many courts there are, the number of them, the justices there are, et cetera? That's up to Congress to decide that. That's written in the Constitution. Now, over the years, the number has varied. The map that you're looking at, that you see before you, has got labels on there of the U.S. district courts, as well as the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. And so there are three layers, basically, to the federal judiciary. You've got the U.S. district courts, there are 94 districts. Then you've got the appeals court, which is the one that's kind of in the middle, which it's where people go to like hear, basically appeal the case, right? But you don't retry it. They just they review the lower case and decide whether or not what was done before was done correctly. And then the last court of appeals, of course, is at the Supreme Court. Now, the justices have varied over the years. When we first started out with George Washington, there were 6 Supreme Court justices. John Adams lowered it to 5. It went back up to, for a while, it was at 7. At one point, it was up to 10. And now it's been at a steady 9 for a while now. So that number, the idea that the number cannot shift, the number has shifted over the years, but it has not shifted in a long time. Now, in recent years, the issue of the hearings becoming so contentious is one of the things that we need to talk about. Okay, so the guy at the top of the slide there is named Robert Bork. And Robert Bork, his name has become a verb amongst conservatives to be known as "you've been borked." And that refers to that you basically have had your reputation slandered. Robert Bork was nominated by Ronald Reagan in 1987 to fill a Supreme Court vacancy. And he was given a hearing and a confirmation hearing, and it was denied. The Senate voted against him for a number of reasons. The main ones were based on the writings that he had done in previous years, things about segregation, saying that actually against the 1964 Civil Rights Act, things also about equal rights for women, and things of that nature. So and there are others as well. Oh, he also actually, interestingly, was against the case of 1965 Griswold versus Connecticut regarding birth control. So, but that became one of those issues that conservatives kind of talk about a lot today about why the hearings now have become so contentious. The next one was Clarence Thomas. And Clarence Thomas is, if you watched the news yesterday, he's actually the one who swore in Amy Coney Barrett. And he was accused of sexual harassment in 1991 by Anita Hill. We could do an entire panel just on that. And then, of course, in 2018 was the case of Brett Kavanaugh, where he was nominated and was accused by Christine Blasey Ford of a professor of sexually assaulting her at many years ago while they were in early college, or I believe maybe in high school. So those hearings then took on this air of great contention and obviously a lot drama, right? There's a lot of drama on TV. Now, in more recent years, also to add to that controversy, you've got some other people here. So the guy on my left here, my left, would be Antonin Scalia. So Antonin Scalia died in 2016, February 2016, sorry. And so that was an election year, if you might recall, in November. And so when he died, the Republican-controlled Senate claimed that because it was an election year, that the voters of the United States should be able to decide who fills that vacancy. And President Obama, at the time, nominated a guy by the name of Merrick Garland, who is a very moderate centrist judge for the vacancy. He was never given a confirmation hearing. Flash forward now to 2020. Ruth Bader Ginsburg died in September of 2020, and now the rhetoric, of course, has changed, and now it's been claimed that the idea that what happened in 2016 no longer applies in 2020, and there was this concern about getting Amy Coney Barrett confirmed as soon as possible. I think largely because of what Deron, Professor Schreck referred to earlier, the concern that they might lose the Senate, in which case then that the opportunity is gone, and of course the presidency to appoint more justices. Now, Trump has had probably the biggest impact that you're going to see moving forward. And I always find it ironic that people know the least about this branch, because this is the branch that affects your life on a daily basis. And most people don't even realize it, right? Based on the cases that they take on or don't take on, right? Trump has had a huge impact on the federal judiciary. About 25% of appointees have come from him just in a 4-year time span. I won't read the numbers to you, but you can see them right in front of you. He still has about 30 vacancies on the U.S. District Court level that he's not filled. There are 0 vacancies on the Court of Appeals, but that's a much smaller amount of courts. And then he's been able to appoint 3 to the U.S. Supreme Court. So 3 in one 4-year term, or one 4-year term is pretty good. And that's largely because of the guy to my right, which is Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, whose biggest, it is said that his legacy, what he wants his legacy to be, is how many justices he can appoint to the judiciary, and therefore impact legislation moving forward, and the way that that impact is interpreted. To remember, if you're talking about the 3 different branches, it's the judicial branch that interprets the law, right? They don't execute it, they don't make it, they interpret it. They determine what is and what is not constitutional, and it's a great power. So if you could appoint justices from, and I hate to use this word, but from your side, let's say, then moving forward, then you have the power to maybe shape a lot of that legislation, or perhaps strike down a lot of that legislation. Okay, so next week, depending on who wins, hopefully we know next week, God willing. So if Trump wins, he's going to be able to finish filling out those vacancies. There might be some more vacancies on the Supreme Court, who knows? If Biden wins, there's been a lot of talk that you may have heard about what might happen now. Because there's a feeling amongst Democrats that there's been an unfair treatment. The Amy Coney Barrett, Ruth Bader Ginsburg issue is angered a lot of liberals, and they want to see some change. One of the suggestions has been court packing. Again, Congress has the authority to increase the amount of justices that are on the court. So if they want to, in theory, they can. The question is, will they? Joe Biden is kind of an institutionalist. He's more of a moderate centrist. I don't think he's necessarily too crazy about that idea, but he's definitely getting some pressure on him from the liberal part of the party that wants to see that happen. But there are other reforms besides simply court packing. And he's kind of vacillated on coming out and saying directly whether he will or he will not. And basically saying that because no matter what he says, it's going to be a story regardless. That's his response to it. And obviously, if he were to say that yes, he would, it would become a huge story. But other reforms have also been suggested. One was touted by former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg, which was the idea of reforming the court by adding 5 justices appointed by conservatives, by Republicans, 5 justices appointed by Democrats, and then those 10 justices have to decide unanimously on appointing 5 more. And then so you'd have a total of 15 justices on the court that would be able to make decisions that therefore might be a bit more fair. And then we wouldn't have this kind of back and forth politicization of the court, which is something that John Roberts, the Chief Justice, I think in recent years has been very concerned about. In the meantime, Deron, did you have anything maybe you wanted to comment on the stuff I talked about? Anything you wanted to add or?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Do you think any of this is going to play into the election itself? Because we already have over, I think, 60 million people who've already voted. So do you think this is like the court is like a priority issue or on the top of everybody's mind?
I'm glad you asked that, because it's interesting. I mean, for conservatives, of course, this was something that they said that in 2016 helped push Donald Trump over the edge to get people to vote for him, even though a lot of them, who maybe had some hesitation about voting for him, did so because of that very issue. He promised them justices. He gave them a list of the justices that were from the Federalist Society that he was planning to appoint. But now this year, it seems to be the reverse, where studies have shown that Democrats are very much energized, especially more of the liberal wing of the party, by the court issue. And very concerned about the fact that should Joe Biden lose, and anybody, let's face it, there are a couple of justices on there who are older, and if something were to happen, if they were either to retire or something else were to happen, he would have the ability to appoint more.
Right.
So I definitely think that for some people, I think it's become more. And I think the good thing that's come out of this maybe is that people are maybe paying attention to it more. At least that's from my perspective. I'm glad about that.
And, you know, I think one other thing that comes out from all of this is the idea, let's say that somehow that Joe Biden wins Texas and wins all of the other states that everybody believes he's going to win, like North Carolina and things like that. There's a possibility that he could win the top 15 most populated states in our union. And he would end up having the support of a majority of the people in this country from, let's just say, where they live in the state. When you talk about the court system in general, it's almost as if McConnell knew that, you know what, the support the Republican Party was having was dwindling over the years. So he had to make sure that there was one of the branches of government would always represent his frame of thinking for a long period of time. And what I'm getting at is that we could end up having people show up to the ballot box and believe they have majority rule, but it will come down to 5 people on the Supreme Court who will decide for the rest of the country of what the laws are.
Yes. Yes.
And so you have this majority rule, but you also have this, in reality, it's the minority that's running the country.
Right. That's why I find that the reform that I don't know if it was Pete Buttigieg's actual idea. He may have gotten it from, a study or from something else, but I think that idea is very appealing. Just the idea of restoring some kind of balance to the court, because again, it has become so politicized and it's concerning. I saw a question pop up on the screen briefly that asked why was President Trump able to appoint so many justices during his tenure. It's just one of those things that happen. He just got really lucky that there were tons of vacancies between people retiring. And I think that happened also even during the first Bush's era, where just if you just kind of get into that wave, where at that point where people are just retiring off the bench, or if they pass away, because remember, these are lifetime appointments, then there are openings. And the other thing I should mention that's probably even bigger than that is the fact that the Republican-controlled Senate had held up quite a number of seats that were Barack Obama's to appoint, and did not allow him to fill those seats because of techniques that were kept from allowing him to bring on his own people onto the court. There was another question. Did you see that, Deron? I didn't.
Yeah, the question is asked, did we mention anything if there would be a likely Democratic or Republican majority? One thing that we did mention early on, and that's a good question, is the likelihood of it being a Democratic majority is greater than the Republicans holding on to the majority at this point. As I mentioned, there's one Democratic seat that will probably go Republican, but then all of the rest that are currently held by Republicans are up for grabs. 2 lean pretty much on the Democratic side. I know that Republicans stopped campaigning in Colorado for Cory Gardner. John Hickenlooper was always a popular governor of that state. He tried running for president, got his name out there, and I think in a way he was testing the waters to see if he should run for the Senate at the same time. I think Susan Collins is on the ropes. Tom Tillis of North Carolina is on the ropes. And the interesting thing about Tom Tillis, a Republican, he's running against a gentleman by the name of Cal Cunningham, who in the last few weeks was texting a woman that he was having a relationship with that was not his wife, and then his poll numbers went up. It didn't make any sense. So that's how much, I guess you could say that Tom Tillis was unpopular, that people were willing to look at. Merri and I are, we're not saying our age, but we're old enough to remember that if something like this came out, it was an automatically disqualifier for somebody to run for office. So nowadays, somebody could have a relationship with somebody outside their marriage, and their support goes up. It makes absolutely no sense. But I think that has a lot to do with the current climate of our politics. It just goes all the way from the top down, all the way to our local level. That the population is just fed up at this point. And we're willing to look at people's personal lives and push it to the side and just say, are we going to get back on the straight and narrow at this point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I saw that too, and I was like, because most of the voters said that I think it's more discussed with Tom Tillis and also with Donald Trump and Tillis's support for Trump. I see another question. Isn't it normal to confirm a new judge in an election year if the president and Senate are the same party? I mean, is it normal? Yeah. I mean, but it's also, the Constitution also says that there's nothing that says that a president cannot appoint a justice if it's an election year. There's no wording in the Constitution that says that a president cannot appoint one. So, I mean, that was the reason used to keep Merrick Garland, to not even give him a confirmation hearing. It would have been different if they'd given him a hearing and then said, okay, we don't want to confirm him. That's one thing. But, to claim that you're angry about Robert Bork not being given, Robert Bork was given a hearing. Unfortunately, he was turned down, but at this, Merrick Garland was not given a hearing.
And in the difference, we're going back to the Robert Bork and Clarence Thomas period. I mean, this was a time when Robert Bork was voted down because he actually answered his questions and he talked about his views. And nowadays we have confirmation hearings that are like confirmation hearings light, where questions don't even have to be answered.
Right.
So Robert Bork's problem, whether you're liberal or conservative, it has nothing to do with it. His problem is that he actually told everybody his views on issues. Mm-hmm. We don't know what the views are, in a question and answer period from Amy Coney Barrett, whether you're a liberal or Democrat. Questions weren't answered.
Right. Pretty important ones too.
But that's what a confirmation hearing always was about. I ask, you answer, and you answer fully. Mm-hmm. And that hasn't happened in recent years.
Mm-hmm. So those excellent responses. I think I finally figured it out now with my presentation. But to that question that was raised about, so I think constitutionally, yes, the president has the power to nominate a Supreme Court nominee, and the Senate certainly has the power to approve that. I think what we really need to think about, it's really the norms. Back when Justice Scalia passed away with around 10 or 11 months left of the Obama presidency, really before the primaries had really started, the norm by Republicans that they established was that during an election year, they were not going to have a vote on Merrick Garland, somebody who George W. Bush considered nominating to the Supreme Court. They basically just said, no, it's an election year. The American people need to decide. And people like Lindsey Graham, who is a chair of the Judiciary Committee, basically said, you can use my own words against me. And so they created that norm. It isn't in the Constitution. So I think some of the pushback is more along those lines. I personally think, the other thing to kind of think about, this gets a little bit into inside baseball. Donald Trump won the Electoral College. He won it by 306 votes. He has now a third of the Supreme Court. And one way of looking at that is like, for every 102 Electoral College votes he earned, he was able to, for every Supreme Court person he nominated, represents 102 Electoral College votes. Whereas for Bill Clinton, he nominated 2 members, and so between his 2 elections, it would be like 374 Electoral College votes per Supreme Court member, and Obama would be around 350. So it's just for somebody who lost the popular vote to have 1/3 of the Supreme Court, and these Supreme Court members are 48, 52, and 53. So they're likely to be around for the next 40 years, maybe 50 years. I think that's what some of the pushback is. But with my portion, what I wanted to cover a little bit about, Merri nailed it earlier with, we are, at least her and I, are not good predictors of who's going to win an election. I think 4 years ago, we both predicted Hillary Clinton to win. And I'll talk about some of the reasons that as political scientists, we rely on survey research in many of the national polls as well as statewide polls, and I think political convention, assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And here's one reason why. From 1992 until 2012, there is 18 states that you see shaded in blue, plus the District of Columbia, that had voted collectively for Democratic candidates in this time period. There has never been 18 states voting together for the same political party since 1828. And that precedes the modern political party system. So this was what was considered the blue wall. Collectively, these 18 states add up to 242 electoral college votes. And as you may know, you need 270 electoral college votes to win. So this is a great starting point. This was a great starting point for 2016 for Hillary Clinton. This is why I think people like us considered her to be the front runner for that presidential election. Now, as you may know, what happened was she lost states like Michigan by 11,000 votes, 23,000 votes in Wisconsin, and 44,000 votes in Pennsylvania. So that blue wall crumbled. Donald Trump did well in some of these upper Midwest Great Lakes states. But why do I think Joe Biden is likely to win the presidency this time? So we're going to take those blue wall states as a starting point. These are the 18 states that had voted for Democrats from 1992 to 2012. We're also going to add, or I'm going to add, states that since 2008 have voted for Democrat. So this is 2008, 2012, 2016. They're kind of the new blue wall states, if you will. That's Virginia, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, New Hampshire. And if you add the numbers next to each of those state abbreviations represent how many electoral college votes they have. And so that brings you above the 270 threshold that you need to win the Electoral College. So what I wanted to do for a moment here is explain why Donald Trump has such a why he's considered, even though he's the incumbent, he's currently in office, he is the current president, but why it looks like he is facing an uphill battle in 2020. So a couple things I can do here real quick, just as a starting point. So the original blue wall that I was talking about included Michigan, included Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. Am I doing this right? I believe so. So
Yeah, looks good.
Looks good. Looks right, but my number should be 242, not 246. New Hampshire. Okay, so we'll just leave it at that. So this is the original blue wall, and so it gives a good starting point to Joe Biden. If you add in the new blue wall, Colorado, New Hampshire, Virginia, notice he's already above that threshold, Nevada. So even if he were to somehow lose, I think some of the polling is showing New Mexico is a little bit tighter than some previous elections. So even if you were to pull out New Mexico, there's still enough votes there. So this doesn't even begin to get into, now these states are shaded. Why are they shaded the colors that they are? The darkest blue, based on public opinion polls, are showing a strong lead for Joe Biden. The light blue is showing a small to moderate lead for Joe Biden. Similarly on the red side. So the darkest shade of red is strong Republican. The pink shade is leaning Republican. So According to most polling, similar to what Dr. Schreck was talking about with Senate races, these states here that are yellow are states that are up for grabs, that are really hard to predict of how they're going to lean for the 2020 election. However, if we were to look at recent polling, this is from the New York Times, where they uh, add together many different polls from many different, they average polls from many different sources. So you may know that nationally, Joe Biden has this 9-point lead. Last week in my Electoral College presentation, I talked about how we really shouldn't focus on that. We should be looking at these individual states. So the blue wall states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, they all show at a minimum Joe Biden up 6 points. Now, these, again, these are polls. There's a week left to vote. People should be still getting out to vote. I have some concerns about mail-in ballots, whether they're going to get to the polling, county clerk's register's office in time, whether they're all going to be counted, whether the people who say they're going to vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump are actually going to show up. But in even some of these battleground states that are up for grabs, they're showing like Iowa, Florida, North Carolina, and even Georgia, that Joe Biden has a small lead. Now, this site I use for a reason, that many state level polls in 2016 were off considerably, particularly in the battleground states in the upper Midwest. They were not perfect in identifying who was actually going to show up on election day. And it turned out Donald Trump's strongest supporters, whites without a college degree, white males without a college degree, were not fully captured in some of the state level polls. So what this website's doing is basically overcompensating for that. They're basically saying if the current polls were as wrong as they were in 2016, it's possible that a state that Biden has a current 7% lead in, he may lose a state like Wisconsin um, or Iowa. But the point being is he doesn't need them. Even if the state polls were as wrong as they were in 2016, it still shows Biden above the 270 threshold. And so these websites, this one's from the New York Times, there's a lot of ones like them, but they're fun to play around with because you can say, you know what, I think Donald Trump's going to do well in Pennsylvania again. He's going to win Pennsylvania. Arizona's looking pretty strong for Democrats, so I'm going to put Arizona on the Democratic side. Nebraska and Maine are states that break their states into congressional districts. And so for Nebraska, there's 3 congressional districts plus 2 electoral college votes for the state overall. And so the way that this works is in these 3 congressional districts, it's possible, it's based on polling, I think Biden has about a 7 to 8% lead in the 2nd congressional district in Nebraska. So you might throw that into the column for Biden. And so even in this scenario, losing Pennsylvania, Biden could still win. Maybe I showed Wisconsin going for Donald Trump, and based on polling from 2016, if we were is off. But then you start to look at some of these states like a Florida or a Georgia that potentially have the ability to go towards Joe Biden. And so the math is just really difficult for him. So I'd be happy to come back to this in a little bit. I don't want to go too much over my time, but I did want to talk about, I'm going to skip that for now, but the basic point of this slide is to show that back in 2016, many people voted, not many people, a disproportionate number of people compared to previous elections voted for third-party candidates. In fact, the difference between Clinton and Trump in Michigan, Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin could all be accounted for by Libertarian and Green Party votes. And this time around, many people who, there are still people who are going to vote third party. Some of the third party people are now going to vote for Donald Trump, but, you know, Biden's got a 2-to-1 advantage among people who voted in 2016 for a third party that are likely to be supporting him in 2020. Despite all that, I think it's important to talk about this is not over. It's polling doesn't, we don't pick presidents based on polls, we pick it based on votes. And so one of the things I really want to point out is that nationally, the number of whites without a college degree are expected to comprise about 41% of all voters nationally. And you may know that that is one of the largest groups of supporters for President Trump, particularly white males without a college degree. But he polls, or he does very well with whites without a college degree. And if you look at some of the battleground states, the states that are up for grabs and some of those blue wall states, it just so happens that each and every one of them has a disproportionate, a higher number of whites without a college degree in places like Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio, Michigan, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania. So the idea is that the demographics in those states are more favorable for Donald Trump than the national demographics. So that's one reason I wanted to point out that when we look at the national polls, you know, first, we don't pick our president based on the popular vote, and B, the states that truly are really going to matter. And I would argue that more than anything, Pennsylvania is really, really key. It's argued to be the tipping state for determining who wins the presidency. I don't think it's really going to come down to that, but it really could. So Pennsylvania is a key state to keep your eye on election night. And then why else might Trump win? Democrats still have, historically, Democrats have had an advantage in registered voters over Republicans. That being said, Republicans have done an excellent job of registering new voters, particularly in battleground states like Florida, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. They're still a little bit behind, but they have narrowed the gap significantly. If you're interested in looking at that, that's an article from the New York Times. Behind in polls, Republicans see a silver lining in voter registrations. And then the last thing that I think I'll talk about before I turn it back over to questions and comments is Trump. His ground game is just phenomenal. In 2016, they did a great job, but in 2020, the Biden campaign is really focusing on advertisements on TV and some digital ads, and not really getting out and knocking on doors and getting people out, the grassroots kind of activism of getting out the vote. According to this one article from Politico, this is back in August, that Trump had over 2,000 paid staffers in 23 different states. There was at least 2 million volunteers making phone calls, knocking on doors. And the title of that article is about how Trump campaigns claims that they're knocking on 1 million doors a week, while Biden knocks on 0. So again, the polls are not the way that we determine our presidency. And you know, if I played the same game for Trump with making kind of predictions about how Trump could win re-election, it's basically going back to the 2016 model, where he won Arizona in 2016, he won Pennsylvania in 2016, he won Wisconsin in 2016. So in this case, it's giving Michigan to Democrats, and this is a path to victory for Donald Trump. So the path is still there. It's not over yet. I would point out that we've got just records for early voting. We're already up to nearly 70 million people who have voted, and in Texas alone, there's almost 8 million people who have voted early. That's 87% of the total vote totals that they had of all of 2016. I don't want to hog this discussion. We've got about 18 minutes left, so I'm going to stop it there and turn it back over to my colleagues and see what kind of questions we have.
Kevin, if I can just look at one of the questions here. This coming from, I want to say it's Med, and asking if, from our experience, do we think that any candidates, whether it's Biden or Trump, whoever wins, is going to go back on their promises for, like in Biden's case, promises for reform, like claiming student debt and climate change will be aided. I think every person who runs for office makes promises, and at some point they have to compromise based on those promises. Whether it's a Democrat or Republican, they always kind of, right now when they run for office, I liken it to that everything's pretty sharp, and then they have to round off those sharp edges and dull it once they start to govern. So campaigning and governing are two totally different things. And for somebody like Joe Biden, if he wins, who's left of center, he's not left of left. He still has to kind of work towards the center, because I believe if he's going to get elected, it's going to be because of the center. So he can't claim that he's going to get rid of everybody's student debt, or that climate change is going to change tomorrow. He's going to have a government program for it tomorrow. He's going to have to smooth out those edges.
Yeah. There's another question too, Kevin, did you want to say something first before?
No, go ahead, please.
I don't know if you guys see it too, from Thomas. Tom, president is nominated as Supreme Court Justice 29 times in an election year. 10 of those times the same party was in charge of both branches. Why should it be different? 10 times they confirmed the judge. Why should it be different now? You're right, Tom. I wouldn't dispute that. I think that the difference is, though, this time is that if Ruth Bader Ginsburg had died in July as opposed to September, I'd be saying the exact same thing, just because the fact that, it's still, whether it's an election year or not, again, the Constitution is pretty clear. It doesn't matter if it's the Senate's controlled by Democrats or Republicans or whatever. It says the president's got the ability to be able to appoint a justice, and the Senate can confirm that justice. Now, the difference is, though, at this point, people are already voting. So at the end of September, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, the polls in some states were already open. So if you're going to go with the idea that, why it's different from previous ones, one can make the argument that because the president has got it, and again, has got the ability to appoint these justices that have such a huge impact on the country, and people are paying such attention to it, that perhaps then allow that next president, whoever wins, whether it's Trump or Biden, to determine that. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, and I'll just add
sorry.
No, Merri's point is well taken, and I see two comments. One about why do people say that the nomination of Coney Barrett was unconstitutional when it's constitutional, and then I'm going to combine that with the question about what do you think about limiting those lifetime positions to a term of X number of years. So yes, it's not constitutional, or I'm sorry, it's not unconstitutional, Grace. And that's a great point. It's more back to the norms. And again, I would just, remind you of all of the comments that Republicans made back in 2016, saying that, that they were not going to allow Obama to have his Supreme Court nominee have any hearings. And on top of that, there was 120 federal court appointees who also never had any hearings either. So it's not that it's not constitutional, it's just it's breaking norms. So if we're okay with breaking norms, then I think we really need to, then when the shoe's on the other foot, in Democrats potentially, and somebody asked about, making predictions. I think Donald Trump is going to lose election. I think Republicans are going to lose the Senate, and that allows Democrats to, with the House, Senate, and presidency, to break some norms themselves.
Yeah.
So, that's the whole importance with norms, is that once they're broken, then all sides, both sides can continue to violate them in kind of a downward spiral. So I think that's something worth pointing out. And then to the excellent question about lifetime appointments.
Kevin, can I have one quick thing on what you just
Sure.
said? I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but just the idea that the court in recent years, it seems like has been stripped of legitimacy and has been viewed more and more in political terms. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to. And so if this is one more kind of nail in the coffin of that idea that the court is now seen as a political body, where the court has always been kind of quiet off to the side. They're not on TV. They're not being interviewed. There are no cameras allowed. And there's a reason for that. So if we're dragging the court into this kind of political process, that further undermines the legitimacy of the court and the way it's viewed. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, and I think it's the first nominee who didn't get a single vote from the opposing party. There was 52 people, and keep in mind, in the past, you would need 60 votes because you used to be able to filibuster Supreme Court nominees. Of course, that changed under McConnell. And so there would have been zero chance that she would have been nominated if they didn't break that norm of ending the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees. And 2 of those 52 senators who were Republican who voted in favor of her actually were appointed to the Senate and weren't democratically elected senators. We're the only country that does it this way. We shouldn't be, relying on, somebody's health in the Supreme Court of, the random nature of when somebody, passes away, determining how many Supreme Court picks a president gets. No other country does it this way. Typically, they have a 15-year term, and every 2 to 4 years, they select a new Supreme Court member. No other country really has the power. Our Supreme Court has more power than nearly any other judicial branch in any other country because they can overturn laws that passed overwhelmingly in the House and the Senate that were signed into law by the president. So it's just an enormous amount of power for 9 people to have, and many of our cases have been 5-4, 6-3. So for those reasons, I think we really need to look at reform and potentially changing these lifetime appointments to being, limited to maybe 15 years or 20 years or something like that. So I'll leave it at that at this point with that particular question.
And Kevin, you mentioned that 2 of the senators who were appointed to their position, Martha McSally and Kelly Loeffler, are in some pretty challenging elections this time around. And one of the things that I wanted to mention about Loeffler out of Georgia, there are 2, and this normally doesn't happen. There are 2 races for the United States Senate taking place. One is held by David Perdue, who's running against John Ossoff, a Democrat. That was the one that happens. That was the seat that took place every 6 years. But this past summer, I believe, Johnny Isaacson, a senator from Georgia, Republican, retired due to health. Trump filled the position with Kelly Loeffler, and she has been a pretty much a tried and true lieutenant for President Trump. So there are 2 races that are going on at the same time. In this special election, there are a list of candidates on the ballot. It's not a one-on-one. But in both cases, if a candidate running for office in Georgia does not receive 50% of the vote plus 1 the first time around, there has to be a runoff between the person who finished first and the person who finished second. So in both of those cases, or I should say, actually in both of those cases, you might end up getting a situation where you have 2 runoffs that will take place in January, I believe. At least with the seat held by Kelly Loeffler, a Democrat is currently in the lead in the polls in that race. And then there are 2 Republicans, Loeffler and Representative Doug Collins, who are running against each other, essentially to be that opponent of Reverend Warnock. I think it's Ralph Warnock. So you have that challenge going on too. So one of the things that we always wait for, we wait for the results on election day, and we want to know who's going to be in charge and who's going to have the majority. We may not know that until we figure out what's going on with Georgia.
Yeah, and to that point, Deron, it looks like both Democrats are slightly ahead, but I think that they're both going to go into runoff territory. And the thing that we need to keep in mind with that is the people who voter turnout's much higher in November on, national election, and these special runoffs typically have a lot lower voter turnout. And of course, then it'd just be the top two candidates. So if Democrats can't get above the 50% threshold in this first election in November, I think they're in trouble come January. Somebody asked this question: wouldn't it have been nice if Republicans would have nominated Merrick Garland for RBG? And the reason that makes me, I think it would be back to the political norms. I think there is a little bit. If I could get in the minds of Republicans, I think it was probably hard for them to have Antonin Scalia's seat, the most conservative member of the Supreme Court, replaced by Barack Obama. They just didn't want that. And they were willing to break some norms to say, wait, we're going to wait 10 months and see who wins this election and take the chance that a Republican wins. And so I think similarly, Democrats have a hard time with RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, being replaced by arguably the second most conservative member of the Supreme Court, with Amy Coney Barrett. So yeah, that could have been a good olive branch. First of all, Merrick Garland's older, so he won't be on the Supreme Court for long. He wouldn't have been on the Supreme Court for long, and he is somebody who two different presidents of Republican and Democratic parties had considered strongly for the Supreme Court. Deron, are you able to address this question about Kim Foxx and then Lipinski's? You want to talk about that question at all?
Yeah, I think the question is there a chance that Kim Foxx, the Cook County State's attorney, could lose her reelection bid? And then Congressman Lipinski had lost in the primary to Merri Newman, who's pretty much I'm using the words here, a more liberal opponent. Is this a safe seat for Democrats, or should they be concerned? It's a safe seat for Democrats, that's for sure. It's drawn up that way. It's gerrymandered for a Democrat to win, whether the Democrat is left of left or left of center or conservative leaning. As long as there's a D next to the name, that person's going to win. I think Kim Foxx would have. This is probably going to be a challenge for her, but I don't think she's going to lose her reelection bid. I think part of the reason is she has a strong voting base in Chicago, and that's always going to outvote the suburbs. So in order for a Republican to win in a down year for Republicans, all of the stars have to align at the same time. And I think Kim Foxx is buoyed by the fact that you're going to have a strong Democratic turnout this time around.
One of the things I wanted to point out, we have a question about foreign policy implications, and Professor Fefles-Dunkle and I are in 2 weeks are going to talk about implications of how the new the election results are going to impact foreign policy. So I am going to save comments about implications for next time. But just in passing, I'll say, I think Joe Biden's more into alliances, more working with allies, the traditional allies, Germany, UK, European Union, NATO, than President Trump has been in his 4 years. I think with the 4 minutes we have left, it'd be great if there's any final questions from people, but I think I'd give each panel member one thing to end on, and I'll go first. And I just wanted to give kudos to my colleague Merri, because I remember a department meeting maybe back in February, March, where we were talking about Merri, you had mentioned an October surprise with COVID, and at that point, I didn't expect COVID to still be, raging to the point that it still is, and in how it's going to impact. I mean, I think Donald Trump is being severely hurt in his reelection bid because of COVID, because of the number of deaths, because of its economic impact. But then there's these just kind of second, third level implications that you just never quite know about. And this is from an article in the Washington Post today. New voters converge to make Sunbelt competitive. And in the 4 years since the last presidential election, at least 2 million people have moved to Texas, many of them Democrats from places like California, Florida, New York, and Illinois. And then, of course, 800,000 young Latino Americans have turned 18. A wave of new immigrants have been nationalized. More than 3 million Texans have been registered to vote. But my point to Merri's is just, we don't know how many Silicon Valley workers were able to move from California because they can now work remotely, and maybe they're living in battleground states like in Arizona. And similarly, places in, I've heard of people moving from Illinois to Michigan or to Wisconsin, and I don't have any data to back this up, but it is, I just want to give kudos to Merri to pointing this out, that this clearly COVID is still having a major impact on our election. And at this point, I'll turn it back to Merri and Deron with their final comments that they'd like to make.
Sure. Deron, you want to go first, or?
I'll you can go, Merri. That's fine.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. All I was going to say is I just wanted to thank people for tuning in today. I want to make sure that they go out and vote. I always enjoy serving on this panel with Professors Navratil and Fefles-Dunkle. I think this is the first time that none of us actually made a prediction for good reason. But I suggest that we look at the polls and we and take it for what it's worth currently, and follow through and participate on election day, because that's the only poll number, as they say, that really counts. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Deron. I echo everything that Deron just said. I probably should have maybe gone first then, because Deron said something sunny and I said something that's kind of like not so sunny. I wanted to just mention the idea of something that concerns me that I was hoping maybe we could talk about, and just the level of how disinformation and information literacy is also impacting our elections moving forward. I came across an alarming statistic about how many people now believe. About 25% of Americans are actually now believing in some aspect of the QAnon conspiracy theory. And as an educator, that just scares me, I think, more than COVID and a lot of other things do, because if we are not able to believe information that we see in front of us, then how can we possibly know how to vote and for whom to vote? And I want to just, I think, caution everyone to try to be as aware as possible of what you're reading and where you're reading it. And if something just seems kind of funny, then it probably is, and maybe research further on it and try to read as many different things about it as you possibly can to expand that kind of base of knowledge. So, and I also love working with you guys. Miss you both.
And this has just been awesome for me to be able to work with both of you in this, even in this format. It makes it feel normal again. And I know we're at my time limit, and let me just say this. I want to thank our panel members, and if anybody needs to leave, you can. I do see a few more questions, and I've got time. So, Deron, if you need to go, you need to go. Merri, you need to go, you need to go. But one of the questions, I'll give you a moment to respond to this, Merri, in just a minute, about just explaining what QAnon is. And then somebody brought up about Graham Harrison race. Personally, like Deron said, we're not great at predictions. Jamie Harrison has raised over $100 million. And part of this goes back to the Supreme Court. A lot of that money was raised after the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And a lot of Democrats are just really, really upset about the way that the Supreme Court nominees have been handled in the last 4 years. And so money is very helpful, and I think Harrison's going to do very well. I would be very surprised to see him beat Lindsey Graham.
And yeah, going along with that, I mean, I lived back in the day, I lived pretty much on the North Carolina, South Carolina border. And I was pretty much closer to living near the Greenville, Spartanburg area than I was Charlotte or Asheville, North Carolina. Or as a friend of mine said, that where I lived in North Carolina was the sticks. But South Carolina, there's an upstate portion, and then there's that Myrtle Beach portion that everybody talks about, and there's what we have in between. The upstate is very, very, very conservative. It's more conservative than, let's say, that downstate eastern portion of Myrtle Beach. If Lindsey Graham is going to pull it out, he's going to get that area that's kind of like more on the border of Georgia than it is on the border of the Atlantic Ocean. Mm-hmm. So you could, like Professor Navratil is saying, you can pour $100 million into a state. If there's a chance with that 100 million, there would be a chance. But at the same time, you're talking about a conservative state, regardless of how much money is spent.
Yeah, definitely.
Merri, do you want to explain QAnon?
I'd like to see this one.
Yeah, do I want to explain it? No. Will I? Yes. Okay. And
let me start this off. It's QANON. Just to clarify, that was on there.
Thank you. I'm glad thank you for saying that. So a couple of years ago on a website called the 4 Channel, somebody claiming to be this anonymous source named Q basically began started pushing these different theories that Donald Trump was essentially the savior who was going to rescue, and you guys jump in if I'm saying any of this incorrectly, because there's a lot of it here, was going to jump in kind of to save basically us from a lot of different things that range from Democrats being involved in a child sex trafficking ring, people like Oprah, Tom Hanks, celebrities of that nature. So the child sex trafficking, there's more to it. I'm missing something.
There's Pizzagate.
Pedophilia.
Right.
Just in general.
Wayfair even being pedophilia ring. Right. Pizzagate in 2016 is probably one of the scariest results of that. And actually that started even before this. But Pizzagate was basically where a man was believed that a child sex trafficking ring was being run out of this pizza parlor in outside of Washington, D.C., that Hillary Clinton was running, and drove over there with an AR-15, basically created a suicide video to his daughters. And it's like heartbreaking to watch, because he's like, he earnestly believed that these poor children were being trafficked in a basement inside of this pizza parlor. And he gets to the pizza parlor and fires some shots. Luckily, he does not hurt or kill anybody. And when the police wrestle him to the ground, he basically is bewildered and says, I thought there was a basement. Where was the basement? Because there was no basement. And so it's this idea of getting people to believe that members of a political party, of a mainstream political party, are engaged in child sex trafficking and pedophilia. So that's a little scary to me. The idea that whether you like Joe Biden or don't like Joe Biden or want to vote for him or not, the idea that he's a pedophile is just a little bit frightening to me, and that so many people believe it, and that we've got members of Congress, possibly, I think it's 2, I believe, potential members of Congress coming in who believe in QAnon. That's also been, and I'm probably peddling it more now, right, by talking about it, but just to give you an idea that in March, only like 3/4 of Americans had never heard of QAnon. And by September, 50% of Americans had never heard of it. Well, now that number is even, pretty much a lot of people have heard of it now. So that's rather frightening. And the fact that the president also retweets a lot of the things that they push, and then kind of backpedals and says, well, I don't know who they are, I just know they're against pedophilia. And when he's questioned on it at his town hall, it's frightening. And again, we all engage in information literacy. We want our students to be able to decipher what is real from what is not, what is factual from what is just completely utter rubbish. And this is complete utter rubbish. But you're seeing relationships people who you'd never believe that would go down this rabbit hole of believing stuff like this, that do. My brother's an educator at a school around the area. I'm not going to say where, but one of his co-teachers believes in it, and he was just floored. He was like, I couldn't believe that this person believed it.
And there will be one congresswoman who will be coming in to this, new term from Georgia because she is running unopposed, where her supporters harassed the Democratic candidate so much that he not only quit the race, he moved out of the state because he was so tired of it. And there was another one, as Merri pointed out, that there is a Republican candidate in Colorado who defeated a 5-term Republican in the primary and got her big, push forward because she was a QAnon follower. And the Republicans, in a way, have become not only a minority party, but they've become the party of housing conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
So I don't have a lot more to add to that other than just saying that we as citizens, we have so much information that we have access to, and a lot of it is good information. And there's a lot of great reporting going out there, especially from traditional journalists associated with newspapers, some of our broadcast journalists, a lot of great websites out there. And there's a lot of garbage out there. A lot of it's peddled on social media. And it's up to us to be good consumers of information, to make sure before we like or share something that we verify it. And the cool thing is there's a lot of great fact-checking sites out there, and factcheck.org and Snopes and all kinds of others. So, do a little research. This is a unique scenario. We have a global pandemic. We have really challenging economy, many people who are out of work. There's been a lot of racial tensions that have always been there in the United States, but have clearly increased significantly over the summer. And I could go on. This is a really key election at all levels, and I really hope that people educate themselves, and like both of you have mentioned, vote, and make sure that we focus on the big picture issues. And I've been inspired. The lines, it's simultaneously inspiring and infuriating that people have to wait 9 hours in line to vote. But the fact that they still do that, the fact that they stay in line, some people are bringing food and playing music for the people staying in line. It's really encouraging. And just people fought and died for this, not just in foreign wars, but, it's been a work in progress. Initially, only wealthy white males could participate in this election system. And over the course of our 200 and some years, we've expanded the right to vote. But others had to fight really, really hard for us to be able to vote. So exercise your right to vote. And then in this case, make sure your friends and family members vote too. Do what you can. It's not just about yourself voting, it's trying to get others to vote as well. And if anybody would like to help with that, I'd be happy to share resources of how you might be able to get involved. I'm just going to share my email address at the bottom. We still have 37 attendees. Nobody is required to stay on, but if the panelists want to keep up and
I don't care.
any other questions.
I have to let my dog out to go to the bathroom, but as long as you guys don't mind if I take it with me, it's all good with me. Because poor thing's been ringing the bell.
We're going to stop the video, right, Merri?
Yeah, I won't let you watch him, but poor thing.
The other thing you mentioned, Kevin, not only about voting, but since we're all like in tight quarters and everybody's home with their children, it's also a nice time that if you have children, if you have people living, younger brothers and sisters, teach them about the process too. Especially if you have a ballot that's coming to your house, show your kids, show your little brother, your little sister, and teach them about how everything works. I think the civic responsibility aspect, I don't know if we learn about it as much as we should at the lower levels, of school. It shouldn't be that the first time we pay attention to it is when we hit college.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are there more questions coming in, Kevin, from people?
No, I don't see any other questions. So, Does the Electoral College serve the country well? I did a hour and 15-minute
Oh,
video
yeah,
on this last week.
that was fantastic, by the way.
I'm going to say I'd be happy to give other perspectives on this first. Deron, Merri, is there anything you'd like to say about the Electoral College?
I mean, besides the stuff, I don't want to cover a lot of the things that you covered because you covered it so well last time, but just the idea that it definitely seems like it's out of touch with the current reality of where we're at, of the electorate where we're at. The idea that Wyoming can account for, was it one for out of 100 something thousand votes, and a person in California is one out of 700,000 votes, one electoral vote. So definitely, it would seem to me that some reform is definitely needed. Sorry, that's a really bad response.
Yeah.
I just let you take it away, and I'll look after my dog. I'm trying to mute my video and I can't.
Deron, was there anything you wanted to say about
that? I don't necessarily study it as much as others, but if there was one reform, I wouldn't have a problem looking into how Nebraska and Maine do it.
Yeah.
So Deron's referring to states that do an electoral split based on their congressional districts, and it just so happened Maine, for the first time in 2016, split their electoral college vote, and Nebraska did it in 2008, and looks like they're going to do that again here in 2020. But I just want to show an example of that because this is really what the framers intended. So you look at a state, and every state gets its equivalent of votes as it does as representation in the Congress. So we have 2 senators, and then you have at least 1 House of Representative and potentially more. So Nebraska happens to have 5 members of Congress, 2 senators, and 3 House of Representatives. And each of these different colors represents a different congressional district. And the expectation for 2020 is that Trump will win the state overall, and he's likely to easily win the 3rd district, that is Western Nebraska, and he will likely easily win the 1st district, that is part of the eastern part of the state. But the 2nd district is geographically small because it encompasses Omaha and another, so Omaha is in Douglas County, and then Sarpy County is part of the suburbs. And we don't have great polling, but the fact that Trump and Biden are both making visits to Omaha shows in the final week of the campaign, even though Omaha, that one district, is like 0.5% of the necessary total to win the presidency, it's showing that that they care about that district that they may need it to win to get to the 270 threshold. And to Deron's point, if every state did this, it would mean that we couldn't take a state for granted like Illinois, and knowing that all of its electoral college votes are going to go to the Democrat because it looks like they're going to win by 10%. Instead, candidates would have to campaign in perhaps individual districts that might be competitive, like a 2nd district in Omaha, or I think Deron mentioned it earlier, is it the 13th district in Illinois with Rodney Davis and Betsy Lundgren, I forget her last name.
Dirksen Lundgren?
Yeah, thank you. These more swing districts that are, swingy because we don't know if they're Democrat or Republican. And last week, what I was saying, I don't think it serves us very well at all for many different reasons. Merri talked about how, in Wyoming, you really get 4 times the power as voters in places like Texas, California, and Florida. The idea that the candidate with the most votes has lost 5 different times. And one of the biggest problems that I see is candidates really just spend most of their attention in a handful of states. In 2016, it was Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Florida. This year, it's in particular Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. But why are so many other states not getting any presidential visits? The really big states like Texas and California, Illinois, as well as the least populated states. You know, they're just taken for granted because we know how their electoral college votes are going to be distributed in this winner-take-all system. So to end, and you know, at least I could talk all day about the electoral college, but I think it's a really crappy way of electing the president. No other country has borrowed this, and the framers wouldn't recognize it as it is today. So, yeah.
You raised a really good point, Kevin, last week that resonated with me. Just the idea that we have this image of the founding fathers as being these saints, right? That everything they did was sacrosanct, that it was sacred, that we cannot ever question anything that they did. And, you know, they were men who were flawed, and they recognized that maybe what they were doing, that's why the Constitution says a more perfect union. It doesn't say it's perfect, we're done, you know, toss it out the window. It says that we might still have some things we need to fix. So it always bothers me, whereas this idea that nothing can ever be amended or changed because it's written that way. You know, if something's broke, you got to fix it. If it's not working too well, it's got to. If we have how many elections now in the past 20 years where you know, we've had 2 elections in 20 years where the person who's won the popular vote has not won in the Electoral College. So,
yeah,
I think there are a lot of people who feel the same way. Regardless if it was a Democrat or a Republican, it doesn't seem particularly democratic.
Well, and I think what I was pointing out last week is if Texas barely goes Democrat, whether it's 2020 or 2024, or Georgia barely goes Democrat and Florida barely goes Democrat, you could start to see the same, you know, Republicans are going to potentially be in a situation where they could win the popular vote, but lose the Electoral College vote if states like Texas go Democrat, and all, off the top of my head, 37 Electoral College votes go for a Democrat. So it just is a very messy and undemocratic and unfair way of electing a president. All right. I don't see any other questions, and I could, Deron and Merri, we could always talk ourselves separately. So I don't want to force anybody to be on this any longer than they need to be. But if there's not any other questions, I really want to thank everybody for taking the time to attend this event today. I want to thank Amanda and Multimedia and everybody who's helped edit these videos and are going to help us share it with a wider audience afterwards. And again, thank you for my panelists, Dr.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for doing it.
Fefles-Dunkle.
This is great. Thank you for hosting it.
Yeah, thank you for putting it together, Kevin. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.